Lights are bright. Oh, good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you. My name is Steven Bacci. I'm a principal architect on blockchain services at Amazon Web Services. And I'm here today with one of our customers, Club dVIN, to talk about tokenization in the wine industry. And it's a really interesting story. I think you'll find it very interesting. At this point, I think I'll hand over to David here from Club dVIN to take over. David.
Thanks, Steve. There we go. I'm Dave Garrett. Happy to be here today. Thanks for coming by. I used to be a tech guy. I had a tech startup that I sold when I was 28 and dumped it all into a vineyard and a winery in Argentina. Which I don't recommend. But for the last 25 years, I've spent most of my time in luxury and investment-grade wine. And so, why are we here talking about wine at a blockchain conference? Well, the reason why is, there's really two important reasons. One is, wine is huge. It's an enormous, much bigger industry than you think it is. And second, because it has some really unique and interesting problems that really only blockchain can solve. So how big is the wine industry? So wine industry in general, if you look at all of the wine globally, it's about a $435 billion a year industry. So when you think about $435 billion a year, just to put that in perspective, if you take the global film industry and the global television industry and the global publishing industry, and the global music industry, and the global video game industry, and you put them all together, it's still not as big as the wine industry. People spend a lot of their discretionary income on wine. Now, the vast majority of that wine is $1 a liter. It's wine that you drink on a Tuesday night when you're sitting at home. What we're focused on with dVIN is the luxury industry. So the luxury industry is about $100 billion a year. It's only about 1% of the total volume in the wine industry, but it's about 25% or 20% of the total value. So about $100 billion a year. And when you talk about luxury wine, it's we say it's about $50 a bottle. It averages maybe $50 a bottle for those $100 billion. And that $100 billion industry, that luxury wine industry, is already very decentralized, right? So 30,000 independent winemakers all over the world. Most of them really small companies, very small winemakers from France or Italy or Spain or California. There's also about 10 million plus independent middlemen. So when you think about buying a $50 bottle of wine, you're probably buying it from your corner wine shop, your corner bottle shop, or a very nice restaurant. So you're buying it from typically an independent retailer, an independent middleman. So it's very, very decentralized kind of in and of itself. And again, 250 million consumers. So and those 250 million consumers are buying at least one $50 bottle a month. So, and they're spread out all over the world. So the wine industry in and of itself starts off very decentralized. And it's worked pretty much the same way for 1,000 years, right? Wine industry is one of the oldest industries in the world, and it's been working the same way for 1,000 years. And what we're doing at dVIN is we're building the blockchain-enabled platform for the wine industry for the next 1,000 years. One thing that I wanted to mention, going back to the size of the global industry, the luxury industry is about $100 billion, but one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is the investment grade industry, or the investment grade slice of that industry. So if the global wine industry is $435 billion, and the luxury industry, $50 on average, is about $100 billion, then about 10% of that is what we call investment grade or rare wine. So investment grade wine, about $10 billion a year, maybe a little bit less than that. Again, 1% or 0.1% of the volume, but about 10% of the overall luxury wine industry. Now, investment grade wine, Typically, these are bottles that will leave the winery at about $125 a bottle. They'll change hands 3.5 times over 15 years, and typically will double in price every time they change hands. So, and what's interesting about that, this kind of the investment grade slice of the industry, is they've been making it for 1,000 years. So that asset class, the investment grade asset class, is about $250 billion to $300 billion. So these are wines that are sitting in wineries, that are sitting in bonded warehouses like Berry Brothers or London City Bond, or maybe sitting in your uncle's basement, right? So $300 billion asset class. It's a very, very big asset class. And really importantly, over the last 20 years, that asset class has outperformed the S&P and gold. It's been about 1,000% return on average over the last 20 years for investment grade wine. So it's a big asset class that has oversized returns. So why is that important? Why am I talking about that? Well, so that asset class, $300 billion asset class, is interesting, but it doesn't enjoy a lot of the benefits that other asset classes of the same size enjoy, right? You can't insure your wine collection. It's very, very difficult to insure it. You can't leverage it. You can't borrow against it. There's no real price transparency. And a lot of that comes because there's no deed of ownership over a bottle of wine. And what we've created, kind of our first product, was what we call the digital cork, which is a specialized NFT that is a deed of ownership, or actually in the EU we call it a digital product passport, over an individual bottle of wine. And what that does is it provides a deed of ownership, so now you know who owns that bottle, and there's a registry on the blockchain where you can see who owns that bottle. There's a chain of ownership. We've also instituted a chain of custody, so you can see where that bottle has gone. We say from grape to glass. You can track the bottle all the way from the winemaker to the consumer. And there's anti-fraud, anti-counterfeit protections built in. But most importantly, it provides this price transparency, right? It turns this investment-grade bottle of wine from a possession into an asset. And now you have an asset that you can treat just like other assets that you have, other investment-grade assets. However, wine is a little bit different from other assets because eventually, someday, if you're lucky, you get to drink it. So we've built a unique mechanism for the digital cork NFT, whereas the consumer, you can, when you open the physical bottle, you can pull the digital cork. And when you pull the digital cork, it does a couple of things. The most important being that it destroys the original digital cork. So that asset is no longer authentic. It's gone. And it mints you a new NFT that we call a tasting token NFT, which is a authentic proof of experience. And that tasting token comes with some interesting benefits from the winery. Typically, it comes with status from the winery or rewards from the winery, right? So you get this kind of interesting benefit from being a consumer for self-reporting when that bottle has been opened. Now, over time, we're working with a bunch of different companies around the world that are building interesting on-bottle technology that will, sometimes it's an RFID ribbon that sits inside of the cork or a strap over the top of the cork, so that instead of having to count on the customer to self-report when that bottle is opened, it'll actually be reported as soon as the bottle is opened, then that digital cork will be destroyed. And what that'll do as an asset class, imagine being able to know how many bottles of the 2001 Petrus are still available in the world, or how many bottles of the 1999 Chateau Palmer. So that's the tasting token NFT. But the really interesting thing that we're doing later this year is we're launching our own, the first native token for the wine industry that we call dVIN Coin. And what that will do is a bunch of different things. But the most important thing is it creates a lubricant for all of the things that we talked about today. So The winemaker takes VIN coin, attaches it to a bottle of wine, that bottle makes its way through the supply chain, and when the consumer opens the bottle, they can claim the VIN coin as a reward for sending data back to the winemaker. So it's very kind of native Web3 idea, right? You as the consumer, you own your data. The winemaker can pay you in crypto for you to share your data back with the winemaker. Now, why is that important? Why is it important for the winemaker to have data? Well, right now, winemakers have no data. So an individual winemaker, and for again, many reasons, the winemaker doesn't really know where their bottles are in the world, or where they're being consumed, or who's consuming them, or when. Interestingly, with especially luxury or investment grade wine, the difference between purchase and consumption is very far apart. When you think about when you open a great bottle of wine, we always say, it's typically made 10 years ago by somebody 10,000 miles away. And that's interesting and fun as a consumer, but when you think about it from a winemaker's perspective, almost everything that you purchase, you're consuming it in the same moment or very, very soon after you purchase it. Consumption and purchase are really the same thing. But with luxury or investment grade wine, uniquely and differently from almost anything else, consumption happens 5, 10, 15 years after purchase. And because of that, the winemaker really doesn't have a lot of great data, right? They don't have any data about consumption. They don't have consumption data. They don't know when people are drinking their wine. Maybe they're designing a wine that's meant to be consumed after 6 or 8 years, but consumers are consuming it after 12 years. Or maybe they're consuming it too soon, after 3 or 4 years. So without that data, without that information, it's very hard for them to have product development or marketing or packaging or messaging. They don't have the information in order to optimize that correctly. The second kind of data that they have is supply chain data. So the supply chain for wine is incredibly atomized. As we said, there's 10 million independent middlemen in the world that move this luxury wine around the world. So with 10 million independent middlemen, you don't really have any data about your supply chain. You're sending a little bit of wine here, you're sending a little bit of wine there, without knowing where that wine really is being consumed, it's very hard to have an optimized supply chain. And again, because you're a little winemaker and you make very, very little wine, you have a limited amount of wine that you can make, it's important for you to have the most optimized supply chain that you can have, right? And then the third thing is customer data. You really don't know who's drinking your wine. And what VIN coin will allow you to do is essentially for the winemaker, through time and space, to be able to acquire new customers and to do it really inexpensively. In Napa Valley last year, the average customer acquisition cost for a wine consumer was about $450 US. Incredibly expensive customer acquisition. With VIN coin, we hope to reduce that to single-digit dollars. So what we're doing with the digital Cork and the tasting token and with VIN coin is we're creating a new ecosystem and a new operating system for the wine industry. And in phase one, what that's doing is it's really loyalty, right? The VIN coin that you make, so the VIN coin, again, it's attached by the winemaker. It makes its way through the supply chain. When you open the bottle as a consumer, you get more VIN coin. You can use that to buy new wine or buy a winemaker experience or buy a winemaker dinner or a tasting or a harvest experience with the winery. And then the winery takes that VIN coin and puts it on the next year's bottle, right? So it creates a closed ecosystem, a closed economy. But it's really based on loyalty, right? Kind of like air miles. What we're building is kind of this air miles environment where winemakers are now closer to their consumers. They get data, they get customer acquisition. Building really a bridge to the next generation of wine consumers. And that's really important to the industry. I buy wine the same way that my parents bought wine, and they bought wine the same way that their parents bought wine. But the next generation of wine consumers that are, data native, internet natives, are used to having a closer relationship with the brands that they have an affinity with. They're used to more experiential purchases. We think that having digital corks and tasting tokens and Vincoin really builds a bridge and loyalty to the next generation of wine consumers. But the long-term goal is really putting the entire $100 billion a year luxury wine industry on that supply chain on chain. So when you think about supply chain, when you think about the supply chain for luxury wine, the average transaction for this $100 billion a year industry is a little tiny winery in Burgundy selling 5 cases of wine to a little tiny importer in Oslo, right? So, and that transaction, that little transaction, $2,000, 5 cases of wine, that happens tens of millions of times a year all over the world. Now that's an incredibly inefficient supply chain, and it's inefficient for a bunch of different reasons. First, if you've got these two little parties, right, a little tiny winemaker and a little tiny importer, you've got counterparty risk. If I'm the winemaker, how do I know that that importer is going to pay me? And if I'm the importer, how do I know that that winemaker is going to send me the wine? So to solve counterparty risk, we can use smart contracts, right? By putting the supply chain on chain, now you don't have that risk. With a smart contract, that can be a trustless transaction. And again, imagine that tens of millions of times a year across the world. The second thing is cross-border transactions. So as we all know, cross-border settlement takes a lot of time and costs a lot of money. Those international wires, if you send an international wire for $50 million, you're actually paying less than this little winemaker is paying and the little importer is paying for their $2,000 wire transfer. And then there's FX slippage, right? Again, these little tiny transactions, they're paying the worst FX transaction rates. So we did a little study last year, and for every $50 bottle of wine, $6.15 is counterparty risk, wire fees, and FX slippage. That's 12.5% of every bottle that you're buying is just basically going to the banks. We think that taking the entire supply chain, moving it on chain will save money for the winemaker, save money for the consumer, and create a much better experience. So again, taking a 1,000-year industry and moving it into and building the platform for the next 1,000 years. And we're doing it with a lot of help from AWS. So I'll hand it over to Steve to kind of talk about how we're using it.
Of course.
Oh, you have yours.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Dave. So I'm just going to speak to you about, very briefly, from a 35,000-foot perspective, about how AWS helped David and his team to build the solution he's just been outlining here today. Part of my job as principal architect on blockchain services is to look at what's happening across the world in the blockchain space and feed that view back into our products and services, but also work very closely with individual customers. And despite the size of AWS, we, as I'm sure some of you who have worked with AWS will tell you, would perhaps agree with me when I say that we take startups very seriously, and we, as an infrastructure provider, we particularly like innovating for the innovators. So how does that manifest itself in terms of blockchain, which is a space we take very seriously because we see so much innovation in the Web3 blockchain space? How does that manifest itself with this particular story is what I'd just like to outline to you today for the next few minutes. So from a 35,000-foot perspective, David and his team, Club dVIN, have used a service we have called Amazon Managed Blockchain, which is just like any other AWS service in the sense of it's very easy to set up, it provides low-cost, predictable pricing, very secure, very compliant, and you just set it up very easily from your AWS console. But the key thing here, and this is the key thing I'd like you to perhaps understand, is that coming back to this point about innovating for the innovators, it takes away the undifferentiated heavy lifting of developing a blockchain application. So if you think about connecting to a public blockchain, there's quite a lot of specialist knowledge you need to make that work. You've got the cost of setting up the nodes, you've got the cost of running the nodes, keeping everything secure, dealing with hard forks, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of work there. And Amazon Managed Blockchain takes all that heavy lifting away from you and provides you with a very simple endpoint, and we support Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Polygon now. Provides you a very simple endpoint, and basically means that you can concentrate on what you want to be able to concentrate on, which is building the innovation and really focusing on developing your application, as indeed David's team has done. So, but we don't just, when customers talk to us, we had initial conversation when we first met David and his team at our reInvent conference last year. We don't just offer managed service, we offer all our services with a degree of specialist architecture knowledge. We have a dedicated specialist solution architecture team who will work with you and advise you the best way to bring all the other AWS services to your particular problem, to your particular business. And we work with a lot of the major companies in the crypto space. I think I read somewhere that something like 60% of the world's blockchain nodes are running on AWS cloud. And we work with a lot of major crypto exchanges like Coinbase. So that kind of expertise kind of percolates down to individual conversations we have with customers in leveraging the services. So you don't necessarily have to use managed blockchain. You could decide, for example, if you're setting up a crypto exchange, a managed blockchain service may not be your first choice. You may want to build everything from ground up using one of the other AWS services, and we can help with that as well. So just to focus back in on Amazon Managed Blockchain, we don't tend to make a big song and dance about our services. We don't spend serious amounts of money on marketing. We let our services speak for ourselves. And last year we launched, which some of you may be aware of, but I suspect a lot of you may not necessarily be aware of. Last year we launched a new capability, which is on the right-hand side here. So as well as offering node hosting, like I said, in an easy-to-use way, and that's called Amazon Managed Blockchain Access, we now have this blockchain indexing and querying capability. So using serverless APIs, you can retrieve data with sub-second latency from public blockchains, primarily Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Polygon. And because we realize, as well as deploying smart contracts and building things on a blockchain, you also need, generally speaking, you need to get access to the blockchain, the huge amounts of blockchain data there to drive your application. And particularly if you start thinking about using AI models and so on, excuse me. So a lot of the costs involved in setting up blockchain applications come down to compute and data storage. By using Amazon Managed Blockchain and using our data querying service called Amazon Managed Blockchain Query, you can significantly reduce all those costs. And that's indeed one of the value-added propositions David has found with his solution. Yeah, and just if you look at this is a very simplified diagram, but if you imagine the complexity of Web3 space in terms of technology providers and platforms, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. We used to sit at just the infrastructure level, being an infrastructure provider, but we have moved up slightly into the data space by providing this Amazon Managed Blockchain Query service. And you will see on this diagram here, we have SageMaker and Bedrock, which is two of our AI services, and obviously AI is so important these days and has garnered a lot of mind share. Our managed blockchain service, Bedrock, for example, once you have two managed services, it starts to become very easy to plug and play and put these things together. And we're seeing a lot of customers look at that now. And it just, again, comes back down to this point, innovating for innovators, taking away the undifferentiated heavy lifting for the customer. And if you think about some use cases, for example, building an application which extracts token data from a public blockchain. On the right, I've only just shown Ethereum, but Amazon Managed Blockchain, you can do this for any blockchain, or you can build a cross-chain application to extract token data from any public blockchain. It becomes really easy because ultimately you're just going through to one point to get all your blockchain access, and it just massively simplifies the whole task of developing a blockchain application on the cloud. And that's it. That's pretty much it at that point. We're at 5 minutes. And I think we can take some questions. Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we saved a couple minutes.
I can't see people very well. That's better.
Yeah, can't see very well. And do we have somebody with a microphone down here in the front?
Okay. Yes, thank you. I saw in your image that it was an RFID tag or sticker or something. You didn't describe in detail the actual mechanism of the token, how you how you attach that to the bottle, and then how you uncork it. Could you just give a little bit more flavor on that?
Sure. So we work with a bunch of different providers that do on-bottle tech. So it's actually really interesting. The RFID has been used in the wine industry for a little while. There's probably 5 or 6 major providers of RFID stickers. We also think NFC is pretty interesting right now. Some winemakers just use QR codes or even serial numbers as a unique identifier. And we can really work with any of those. So our goal is not really to pick a winner of the on-bottle tech. We want to work with a bunch of different ones, and again, just be transparent about which on-bottle tech is being used on that bottle, and store that information on chain, so that as a secondary market buyer, you can see, oh, this wine has been traced with RFID, or this bottle might have used a different tech. I will tell you about a couple of really interesting on-bottle tech providers. There's 2 new ones that we're working with. We're actually doing a really interesting demo with one called Distinct in the fall, which is a smart ink technology. And they have RFID on the back. The RFID is just really the connectivity. But the smart ink using nanoparticles is super, super interesting. They use it for currency and for passports and other documents. They're building that into the label, where using a special reader, you can tell exactly, it's completely tamper-proof and completely copy-proof. So there's a bunch of different on-bottle tech. And then with regards to opening the bottle, right now, you tap the bottle with your phone. If that bottle is in your wallet, we say for non-blockchain people in your account, but if it's in your wallet, you can press a button and that uncorks the bottle. But in the future, we think there's a bunch of really interesting technologies that I've seen. Again, one of them is there's like an RFID ribbon that they thread through the cork. So when you pull the cork out, it automatically does it. Some winemakers like that. Some winemakers really don't like that idea. There's another one with an RFID or an NFC kind of tab that goes over the top of the cork. So in order to get at the wine, almost all of those things can probably be defeated if you wanted to take a bottle and empty out the wine and put fruit juice in there and sell it to someone else. But that problem really gets solved with transparency, right? If you've got chain of ownership and chain of custody, it makes it really, it's not really an economical model for having mass counterfeit or fraud in the wine industry. And that's really the big problem. The problem isn't one guy at home in his kitchen doing it. It's the fact that, a few years ago, Penfold said that there was more fake Penfolds in China than there was real Penfolds. Like, that problem can get solved if you know where every bottle is, right? If every bottle is marked, you know where every bottle is, and you have mass transparency. Sorry. Next question? Go ahead. Here in the front? Coming with the mic, yeah.
Okay, so thank you for your great presentation. I'm very impressed. And I have one question about how to decide price by one NFT. Because there are some theories and maybe researches about how to decide prices of aged wine by for example, auction systems or something else. How would you think about that deciding price with one NFT?
It's a really, really good question. And it's something that I wanted to talk about and kind of missed in the presentation. So wine is different from every other asset, right? When you think about real estate or stocks or bonds or gold or diamonds, if you wanted to invest $100,000 in any of those assets, you could do it right now, right here from your phone in 10 minutes. If you wanted to invest $100,000 in wine, I would challenge anybody to be able to do it in a week. using the same criteria that you would use to invest in any of those other assets. It's very, very difficult to do. You have to have trusted parties. You have to do research. It's very difficult to like figure out what the right price is. So what putting all of that wine on the blockchain does is it provides price transparency, where you can see all over the world what a bottle of 2001 Chateau Palmer that has perfect provenance should go for. And that price transparency, we think, really not only is great for the industry, but adds tons of liquidity into that market. So what right now is maybe a $300 billion asset class could be much, much more if you had if you treated wine like any other investable asset. Did you want to touch that as well, or?
No, that's good. I think it's fine.
I think we're over, and I think they're gonna cane us off the stage. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
We really appreciate it.